I'm doing a video series on vegetable fermentation funk, so you know how to identify what's what, is it safe or not, and what to do about it. Today's topic will discuss prevention, so if you want to learn more about the whys and the hows of Kahm yeast, mold, slimy brine, and brown layers, please go back and watch those videos in the series for all details. Links are provided in the description. Let's get into today's topic of fermentation funk prevention. Here is the order of topics to be covered. Chapters are provided, so feel free to jump to the section you are most interested. In my own personal fermenting experience, I have found some things preventable and others not. Starting with mold. This is one of the easiest to prevent. Here's how. 1. Cleanliness. Many times when mold develops, the equipment being used isn't clean enough. Here are some examples of little things that can be missed. The jar was clean when you put it away last, but that happened to be days or even weeks ago. So when you take it out again from the cupboard today and you're going to use it, you figure it's still clean. Those little invisible mold spores that waft through the air settle on things, just waiting for some moisture to come along and activate it. So even if the jar has been sitting there in the cupboard and it still looks perfectly clean, give it a fresh wash with hot soapy water anyway, just before use, to ensure that all possible spores are washed away. Remember to also wash in hot soapy water just before use the fermenting weight and the lid, whether it be a regular lid or a specialty fermenting lid. 2. Brine coverage. Brine coverage prevents mold because mold can't grow beneath the brine, but it can grow on top of the brine where there's oxygen. So if there's any food pieces poking up or floating atop that brine surface, that's an invitation for mold development. Therefore, make sure that the food being fermented is fully submerged beneath the brine during the entire fermentation period before long-term storage in the refrigerator. Here's an example where some of the cabbage is rising above the brine, and the black spot is mold development. You'll see that that mold is developing where there is oxygen exposure, which is above the brine. 3. The lid. Believe it or not, in rare cases, the lid could be the culprit. If clean equipment and brine submersion are not the problem, try different lids to see if the result changes. 4. Climate. Hot and humid climates aren't a guarantee for mold issues, but they can increase the potential. Mold not only needs the oxygen, but it loves humidity and heat. And in this case, I'd recommend using a fermenting lid with an oxygen extraction pump like the Easy Fermenter. With most fermentation specialty lids, they don't allow oxygen in, but they also do not immediately extract the oxygen already present in the jar once the lid is placed on. Depending on the lid system, this could leave lingering oxygen in the jar for many days, giving mold an opportunity to develop quickly in a hot and humid climate, when it may not do so in a more temperate or cool climate. The unique design of the Easy Fermenter is that it has an extraction pump. This pump removes the remaining oxygen immediately once the lid is placed on the jar, giving no time for air to linger. This could be what you need if you fall under mold issues caused by a hot and humid climate. Slimy brine. Hopefully you watched my slimy brine video and remember that a viscous brine caused by a leuconostoc overgrowth is not harmful. It's merely a natural result of more leuconostoc bacteria present than normal. Once I had some viscous brine developed with one pickle jar and not with the other. Both jars were made at the exact same time with cukes from the same cucumber plant from my garden, and they were made with the same recipe. So why did one have a leuconostoc overgrowth and the other didn't, with all being the same? I don't know. So I don't have a remedy for you on this one. Remember though, a leuconostoc overgrowth is not harmful. So the fermentation is not a loss. However, if you feel that you've got the leuconostoc overgrowth answer from your own fermenting experience, feel free to share in the comments section. Kahm yeast. This can be a real bugger to deal with. For one, foods with a higher natural sugar content tend to be the foods that develop Kahm yeast for the most part. For example, red cabbage, beets, carrots, cucumbers, tomatoes, onions. It's not a guarantee that the Kahm yeast will or will not develop on any fermented food, but just be aware that those kinds of foods are more prone due to their natural sugar content being higher than, let's say, green cabbage or cauliflower. I've experimented with salt percentage, raising it as high as 5%, using different types of lids, sterilizing equipment beyond washing, and have found no Kahm yeast relief from any of those. Some people swear, though, that using a higher salt percentage works for them, and I don't doubt their experience. That just hasn't been mine. In regards to vegetable fermentation, the one thing I have found to be the best help for Kahm yeast prevention, or at least minimizing its development, is the air content within the jar. For me, the less oxygen present has resulted in less Kahm yeast development. One way to reduce oxygen content with vegetable fermentation is to fill the jar to the very rim and put the lid on. This will cause some brine to overflow a bit as the lid is put on, but minimal air remains in the jar. In this case, a plate or a towel under the jar is needed since the brine will continue to overflow a bit during the first 7 days of the fermentation. Then, of course, there are specialty fermentation lids. Most fermentation lid systems are a one-way valve system, meaning they allow air and gases to escape outward, but don't allow air back in. However, that air already present in the jar at the time of lid placement is not extracted. So even when using a fermentation lid, if there's oxygen lingering in the jar, Kahm yeast can still develop. Then there's the easy fermenter with its oxygen extraction pump. If that oxygen is extracted immediately, the Kahm yeast development will be non-existent or at least drastically reduced. Watch my fermentation lids video where I test 6 different lids and show you the results, which ones were the best with Kahm yeast prevention and which ones were just so-so. For me, oxygen reduction within the jar has been the best preventer of Kahm yeast with vegetable fermentations. If you have a method that works for you, share in the comments section. And just a little side note here, Kahm yeast really doesn't bother me that much. It's harmless and it's pretty easy just to clean it out at the end of the fermentation period, as you see me do in a lot of my fermentation recipe videos. This is more for the point if Kahm yeast really bugs ya. As for making homemade vinegar, one way to prevent Kahm yeast is to stir the mixture 1 to 2 times daily during the fermentation process. This interrupts the Kahm yeast spores from being able to bloom and develop over top, and the stirring does not hurt the fermentation process of the vinegar. FYI though, vinegar and kombucha fermentation is a different process than vegetable fermentation and uses different microbes that do need oxygen, which is opposite of vegetable fermentation. So yes, stir for Kahm yeast prevention with vinegar making and do not stir for vegetable fermentations. Rather, follow the advice I've previously given. The brown layer. A brown layer that forms due to the fermented food being stored long-term in an environment too warm obviously needs to be moved to a cooler environment. But to clarify, what do I mean by long-term? I mean 3 months or longer. What do I mean by an environment too warm? I mean above 50 degrees. So a combination of an environment above 50 degrees for longer than 3 months, the sauerkraut will begin forming that brown layer due to microbial imbalance and shifts. To learn more if it's dangerous or not, or what to do about it and how to save your kraut if it does start developing that brown layer, watch video number 4 in this video series. I have found the optimal long-term storage temperature to be between 38 degrees and 45. In the old days, our ancestors achieved this temperature by burying fermentation pots in the ground during the winter or using a root cellar. Nowadays, most people don't have a root cellar, nor do they bury ceramic pots in the ground over winter, which is why the refrigerator is necessary for modern times. Not so much for the fermentation itself, since fermenting needs to take place in a warm environment, like in the 70s or the 80s, but for the long-term storage. That's when the temperatures need to be cool. Sometimes the brown layer can form in the fridge, but rarely. I have seen it happen though. In this case, it is a microbial imbalance, not necessarily spoilage. And all you need to do is remove it just as I demonstrate in video number 4 of this Fermentation Funk series. Oxidation can cause a brown layer as well. This can happen when the fermented food is above the brine. Simply ensure the brine level is adequate to cover all the food. A fructan-based brown layer with sauerkraut can sometimes be resolved with a salt adjustment. And if you're wondering what a fructan-caused brown layer even is to begin with, watch video number 4 in this Fermentation Funk series where I explain. Here are 2 jars of red sauerkraut with the addition of red beet, pear, and fennel. The one on the left used a general salt measurement of 1 tablespoon to 2 pounds of cabbage. The one on the right had its salt content based on total food weight, not just the cabbage. A digital scale was used. The one on the left did develop brown on top, and the one on the right did not. Let's look at the salt content difference between the general versus the precise measurement. The general measurement of 1 tablespoon salt to 2 pounds of cabbage can vary between 15 to 20 grams of salt because a lot of factors are variable, including salt grain size, was the tablespoon level, was it rounded, etc. For the precise salt calculation, all food was weighed first. 700 grams of cabbage plus 70 grams of fennel plus 300 grams of shredded beet, plus 170 grams of pear, which totaled 1,240 grams of food weight. The 1,240 grams of total food weight was then multiplied by 2.5%. 2.5% will be our total salt content. This equaled 31 grams. Therefore, 31 grams of salt was added to the jar. Example on the right. That salt adjustment affected the microbial balance and resolved the fructan-based brown layer. Now, just remember though, if your kraut develops a fructan-based brown layer, it's harmless. Both sauerkraut fermentations in this example are safe to eat, fructan brown layer or not. This is a resolve that you can try if a fructan-caused brown layer bothers you. I must add that this is a highly likely fix and not a guarantee. Additionally, this 2.5% salt content measurement based on total food weight works best with cabbage-based vegetable fermentations such as sauerkrauts. I hope these tips have helped, and remember to scroll through the comments section to check out suggestions that others have contributed. And if you would like to support me and my channel, I would just love it if you considered buying me a cup of tea. Your $5 donation would be so appreciated and help me continue making more free content like this so that you and others can become a more confident and competent fermenter. All the videos for the Fermentation Funk series can be found in this playlist right here. My video on the comparison of 6 fermentation lids with results can be seen right here. Browse all my favorite fermenting gear on my website, cleanfoodliving.net. Links are also provided in the description. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.